croquetas de gambas and churros. Croquetas de gambas is basically a shrimp beignet. And then we're going to have churros, which is basically a choux pastry that you're going to deep fry. So we're not going into that diet thing yet. We'll have time for maybe next time, inshallah. Aglio is just, excuse me. We're going to melt some butter. Sorry, we're making the croquetas de gambas. So basically we'll make a bechamel. So we're going to melt the butter. And then you want to get your flour ready. The flour. Preferably, you always have to sift your flour. The reason is that you might have lumps, and also when it's been stuck in your cupboard for quite a long time, it's quite tossed. So what you want is something quite airy. So in the beginning, what we're going to do is we're going to cook the flour. Basically to make a roux. So make sure the flour is cooked through. As you want to add either some cold milk, or you can also add some lukewarm milk, up to you. Of course, the cold milk will be longer to cook. So once it's been boiling for quite a while, what you're going to do is add the milk. Be careful because of the temperature of the milk. And be careful never to do that. See, I am showing you not to do that, so next time you'll know. You have to be very, very delicate. And then you mix it well so you have no lumps. So in the beginning, see, when I do gently, of course it doesn't splash. Don't forget I add salt and pepper. So off the heat, I'm gonna add my shrimps. Now, you have two ways of doing things. Either you can infuse the head and the shell of your shrimps, especially when it is in season in Bahrain. But because I use some frozen one, I'm just gonna defreeze them. Make sure you don't have extra water, and then I add it to the preparation. And I forgot the tomato paste. Teaspoon to add some taste to it. You mix it well. I'm going to add my shrimps. The gambas would have been better, but now they're not in season. So I'm just going to get some uncooked shrimps. In the recipe, it does say pre-cook your shrimp, but as for me, because it only takes a few minutes, I think it's much better to cook it within the bechamel sauce. 3 to 5 minutes. As for the tomato puree, you can add according to your liking. And you don't even have to make it, to add it if you want to. As a more complicated version, as I was saying, you can infuse your milk previously in the shell and the head of the shrimps. You will have even more flavor. the filling that way. So what I'm going to do, I always taste my preparation to make sure. And that's a good thing because it needs some salt as usual. Always the ingredient that is missing in it. And if you like some kind of tangle to it, you can even add some chili powder. I'm just gonna let it rest until it cools down. With the bechamel sauce, you have to be careful. You always have to put a cling film to the contact, otherwise it will crust. What you do, you have enough cling film, and then with the help of your hand, you push it down. So it doesn't crust. Okay? If you have a dinner party, you can actually make that the day in advance. It's no problem. Basically, it is a choux pastry. But my choux pastry, normally, I use only milk and water. And this time, I'm going to use only water. Also, the churros have the tendency to have a paste that is quite thick. Unlike the choux pastry, which is quite runny. So this time we'll make it actually half-half. I'm going to add one more egg just because I like the texture of it. This is more airy. If you want, you can follow the recipe by the book. It's fine as well, according to your taste. What I do now, I add 2 cups of water. I'm going to add the brown sugar. With the choux pastry, you would use white sugar and not as much. I'm going to add a pinch of salt. And then some butter. Try to have a butter that is at room temperature. It always make sure you prepare all the ingredients before. So I'm going to have, and I think it's 2 cups of flour because I doubled the quantity of the ingredients. Also, I get my sieve ready, my strainer ready, because I want to sift my flour then again, for the same reason. My mixer ready, because I'm quite lazy. I will incorporate with the eggs, which is at the end of the recipe. I don't want to incorporate air. Actually, I do, but I don't want to have the dough that is too inflatable. So I'm not going to use the whisk, I'm going to use the paddle attachment. The paddle attachment is that one. And that would allow actually eggs, the whole egg, to incorporate nicely. Okay, so what you need to do, be careful. I do it at a very low heat because I don't want the water to evaporate. Okay, so what I want is actually the butter to melt, the sugar to be dissolved, and I'm going to mix it. At the moment, I really put it at a very low heat until I see the butter is all melted. Then you can actually increase the heat for about 1 minute. While turning. Now it's starting to boil. Make sure you mix it well. Balls in the middle. The butter is nearly melted. Better, yeah? And now it's time. You remove from the heat. You're going to add your flour all at once. Normally my sieve should be bigger. Make sure you have no lumps, no bugs, nothing. And now you need to move fast. So what you need to do is you mix it well. So in the beginning, because of the projection, be careful. Don't mix it too hard. And then you need your hand, which is what the oil elbow, how do you call that? So once you have this well incorporated, you go back to the heat for about 1 minute. What you need to do is just make sure that your dough is drying out. Don't put the heat too high. But make sure you don't see any part of the flour. Otherwise it's not going to be quite tasty. And when you see that the bowl is actually removing nicely from the pan, you can put it see, that means it's well cooked. So now, of course, you could have continued by hand. In that case, I recommend that you break the dough to allow the air and the heat to kind of spread through. Thank you. No, no. And what you want to do is mix it to the minimum. You're gonna see you have a lot of steam coming out, which is supposed to happen. You don't want to be too hot, too hard, otherwise it will not work either. Gonna mix like that for about 2 minutes. And then you're going to add it one by one. You can increase now to 1. And you wait until the egg is completely incorporated. You're going to add a little bit of vanilla extract. Now my egg is completely done. So I can add a second egg. So the first 2 eggs, you really have to pay attention and make sure that you wait until it incorporates completely. Can you see that in the beginning it has the tendency to be harder to incorporate? No, I don't think you can see it. Well, I doubled the recipes, I would say 4, but because I want this to be airy, I'm going to add a 5th one. But of course, if you follow the recipe, only 4 is needed. But as for me, I like churros to be more airy. So once I have my 4 eggs incorporated, I'm going to wait and see. So see, normally, this is what the texture you should have, which is quite thick. This is it. As for me, I'm going to add 1 or even 2 eggs. But the real churros should be that consistency, which is a bit hard. So I'm gonna get my spatula, make sure all the dough is well incorporated. And then I'm gonna add, I think, 2 eggs. We'll see. I'm going to add the second egg. I'm going to increase the speed. One more time. See, this is kind of what I like as a consistency. It's going to be lighter. So you can see it's not falling just yet, like with choux pastry, but it's quite runny, so it's nicer to my taste. So what I'm going to do is one more time, I'm going to mix it to make sure it's well incorporated. I have 2 schools. The chef that says you have to poach your churros or choux pastry while it reaches 55 degrees, which you have now. And others that say it's better you wait until the next day. They say thermical shock or whatever. So once it reaches the oil, it will sizzle immediately and then it will puff nicely. So up to you. You have no lumps, of course. This is nice. Now this dough, make sure you don't leave it at room temperature without covering it. Then again, it will crust, and then it will be very difficult to then have a nice airy churros without any crust. You simply use a piping bag. If you don't have a piping bag, you can actually use some Ziploc bag as well, freezer bag. Or if you don't want to use any bag at all, because you're scared of using the piping bags, then you can actually use 2 spoons, but it has to be quite small because you don't want it to be quite heavy on your stomach. My bag is actually quite small, but we'll see what we can do with it. What you want to avoid, I need a bigger bag, is to have a lot of air running through. So what we're going to do is just going to push it. And you want to cover until the oil reaches 175 degrees to 180 degrees. Basically, you don't want your oil to be too hot. You don't want it to be not hot enough, otherwise it will absorb all the oil. The thermometer. Then you just have to taste and try a little bit of dough and see how well it's cooking. And some peanut oil. Why do I take the peanut oil? Because it's actually, first of all, it's healthy. Second of all, it brings a very nice taste to it. And third of all, this one in bowl, you can actually reach a very high temperature. Cooling rack ready. Now, if you don't have a cooling rack, that's okay. You can actually use some kitchen paper, but I realized that it will absorb the heat, the grease, and will get actually quite soggy. Where with that way, you're only going to see the oil dripping, and after that you can cover with sugar. You're going to get a pair of scissors. Actually mix some white sugar and some cinnamon. Sugar and cinnamon together. Thank you. Because what we're going to do is we're going to use the same oil for churros as we're going to use for gambas, which you can do the other way around. Mixing shrimp smell with churros would not work. I mean, as for me, personally. So we try to save the environment and we don't waste. So we're going to use the same oil. What you can do as well is filter your oil whenever you use it, and don't throw it each time. You can use it at least 3 to 4 times, depending on the heat that you use and depending on what ingredients you have. Of course, the shrimps, don't overuse it. Excuse me. Okay, now you can see that the oil is kind of moving. So I'm going to take my piping bag. Make sure you tie it very tight. And then you use some very clean scissors. And you put it delicately in the oil. Now, as you can see, it doesn't fry very well, so we're going to wait for a few minutes. You get a spider spoon, because this is what you are best to use when frying things. You don't want your churros to be overcooked and burnt, but you don't want like this to be undercooked, because as you can see, it's all absorbed of oil, which is not right. Scissors ready. Make sure you don't make too many at a time, because you're going to see the temperature will lower quite dramatically. What you want to do is flip them over so it cooks evenly. And then we're going to wait until it pops. Now, because I use 2 extra eggs, meaning 1 extra egg compared to the recipe, you're going to see that it will inflate much more. Now, if you know the recipe from the churros normally, it will not inflate that much. So it's according to your taste, really. See how it's popping out? Do according to your temperature. Maybe you're going to lower, maybe you're going to increase, because after a while what you need to do is have a nice golden color. Flip them over. And in the meantime, we're going to take care of the croquetas. Okay, so when you see that it's getting quite nice and golden color, you can leave it on the cooling rack. If you need to check that the oil that is not necessary. As I explained to you, in the beginning it's going to go very slow, and then as you're going to be frying it, you're going to see that little by little will get more color. So that would be for you to reduce the heat, to make sure it's not heating really hard. That here, all nice and crispy. We're going to cover it with sugar. Bear in mind you have to make sure that the other ones are not burning. And light, isn't it? Nice tingle to it. Well, the Bahraini and the cinnamon, I think it's a love story, isn't it? Okay, I'm gonna get a spoon. My hands, as they are your best tools. I'm gonna form kind of a small ball. I'm gonna put some breadcrumbs. The other one, we're gonna get some panko. Panko or the Asian breadcrumbs. 1 and 2. You can add a bit of salt. Now, if you are allergic to gluten, which is which some people do, what I do is I use some coconut flakes. Which what you do is you put here. Be careful, it's quite delicate. Try to have one wet hand and one dry hand, meaning you're going to coat it with that hand. And then again, like this, very delicately. So be careful, okay? And then into the breadcrumbs. Remove all the excess. Then you put like that. Those you can prepare in advance because especially when you have guests, it takes quite a while to make it. Once you've done the croquetas, what I do is I try to mold it again. We won't have time, so. And careful, you want to put first and then the whole. That will avoid the oil to splash on your face. So you put the bottom and then whole. Better if you can reduce the heat. We're going to continue with the remaining. As you can see, it's a lot of shrimp because I don't want too much of the filling, otherwise it might be a bit heavy.
Can you make it something other than shrimp?
Of course you can, yes. Like meat, like chicken, like anything, yes. No problem.